All right. Welcome to the February County Housing Task Force meeting. Thanks everyone for your flexibility. I think it might have turned out to have been not rescheduled, but reformatted out of an abundance of caution based on what the roads are like now. But I had a pretty scary drive this morning. And I know I live in an urban heat island, so it's much worse out in the rural areas. Just a quick update on a couple of things that are sort of ongoing. Just yesterday, I received the slate of ADU applications from RUPCO. So of the nearly 40 applications they received countywide, there were 22 that qualified. So we'll have to, and all of those applicants requested the full amount. I think all 40 of the applicants requested the full amount, and 14 is what you can fund with the grant award that the county and RUPCO won. So there will be some winnowing down of that will occur over the next 2 weeks. So hopefully ideally by the 21st, we would have our list of 14 grant recipients. Okay. At the last meeting, I mentioned the capital budget, or sorry, the executive budget, I should say. But I also mentioned that there weren't a lot of details on it quite yet. Can everyone see something that starts with governor's housing agenda?
Yep.
Fantastic. Full disclaimer, so this is a 3-page document. I'm on page 2. This is from our friends at the New York Land Bank Association. Adam Zranko, who used to run the Albany County Land Bank and is now in the governor's office, helped put this together. So the first page is really land bank specific.
Chris, can you just increase the zoom on that a little, please?
The zoom? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh. I think.
No.
You got it?
That's better. Thank you.
No problem. I'll put this in the chat. The one caveat I'll have, you'll see a bunch of light blue text here. It's all the same link. It all links to a 1,040-page executive budget document. It doesn't jump to the section, but it does give you the reference point for this section. So if you're interested, you'd be able to scroll down directly to it. So a couple of these things I really want, well, I'll go through all of it, but some I really want to highlight. So the first one right off the bat, support growth in pro-housing certified communities. $100 million in quotes. So I have to do a little bit of a deep dive to figure out why that's in quotes. Well, $100 million in new capital funding to assist pro-housing communities with infrastructure projects. You'll see in the parenthetical here, it says generally not our biggest challenge in already urbanized areas. Clearly does not apply to most of our communities, the vast majority. So that's really interesting. And we did hear the governor announce this at an event in Schenectady last Tuesday, I believe, that supervisors, not Adams and Collins, and I all attended. And we did get our, what do we call it? We got our flowers for being the first county to have all our letters of intent in. So that was nice to hear, my old alma mater. There's also $10.5 million for technical assistance grants to help communities achieve the pro-housing designation. So I believe that's just for doing the building permitting work. I'd be really interested to know if you once you get certified as a pro-housing community, you have to recertify each year, which includes sending in your building permit data. I'm very curious if you can use some of this $10.5 million to pay for building permitting software if you don't already have building permitting software.
Those letters for research just went out. I got one yesterday.
Yeah, it's Adam too.
I did too, yeah.
Okay, the next bullet point is $50 million to build more starter homes. So they're calling it the expansion of the cross-mod pilot. Cross-mod is a brand name of a type of manufactured home that kind of skirts the line between manufactured and modular. The state really likes that concept. So they're throwing some more money into this particular bucket. There was a pilot program last year that involved both land banks and these cross-mod homes. Largely, they were doing infill projects. So they were using manufactured homes as infill in largely urbanized areas. But the cross-mod homes are, like most manufactured / modular homes, significantly less expensive than stick-built homes. So they're putting more funding into that particular resource.
What do you mean by infill?
So if there was a building, since it was a land bank pilot, largely this was, if you had a row of 4 buildings and the land bank demolished one of them, that missing tooth would then become one of these crossbot homes.
Thank you.
Sure. $50 million for down payment and closing cost assistance. I don't believe this is anything particularly new. This is about the amount that this gets funded most years. The AMI might have gone up. I think in previous years, it didn't go as high as 120% of AMI. One of the interesting things to note there is that the homes that you can purchase with the down payment assistance, people who can qualify for the down payment assistance also qualify to purchase homes that are above our median home sales price. So there is a restriction on the median home sales price, but it's higher than you would imagine it might be. Yep, Supervisor Adams?
I'm just wondering how residents access those funds. Is there an agency in Columbia County through which they can access those funds?
It would be an LPA program, so a local program administrator. One of our nonprofits, or not one of ours, but a nonprofit that we partner with would apply for it, and then home buyers would apply to that program. So whether that's...
And do we have any LPAs in our sites for that purpose?
Well, you would become the LPA if you won the grant. So say Galvin applied for this, particular funding source, they would become the LPA for that, much the same way that RUPCO is the LPA for the Plus One ADU program.
So I think if I understand, Brenda, where you're heading with this is, kind of how do we get signed up for this, and are we moving anything forward on that? Because that sounds like it'd be pretty helpful.
I will say, so this might be a little bit different because it uses AMI, and some of the down payment assistance programs use a different metric. They don't actually use area median income. So this is one that I'll drill down much more into. The first mixed income revolving loan fund is interesting to me. This is mostly for financing gaps, where if you're a developer, you don't have enough of a capital stack to get a project done. This new revolving loan fund for mixed income rental, specifically outside of New York City, is a brand new resource. Again, there's 50 million in it, which 50 million tends to go pretty fast for these types of projects. They are doubling the low income housing credits, which is great. So the pool of available LIHTC credits will increase significantly. And then historic tax credits are now a little bit easier to use. There are geographic restrictions that no longer apply. There is a specific project that I'm curious to know if it now qualifies for historic tax credits, which it might not have before. The Village of Valatia owns an old mill building that they've been advertising for sale, and there's been some interest in that. The building itself is not on the historic register, and it is not in a historic district, so previously would not have qualified for historic tax credits. It may now, since they've increased the flexibility. This next one is a concept we've talked about before. This is a little bit of a different form. So this is the home buyer tax incentive, which basically, we called this the Habitat Bill, I think, colloquially. Assemblymember Barrett's office was involved in this on the Assembly side. And I think Senator Henchy's office was involved in this as well. So this would be for any home buyer that purchases a home that was subsidized. So whether their assistance comes from the state, whether it comes from a nonprofit, it doesn't matter what kind of nonprofit. If you are a low to moderate income home buyer, if your locality where you're purchasing the property has opted into this, it's an opt-in. So if your locality has opted into this, you can apply for the exemption, which is 25 to 30% of the assessed value. And then it just doesn't run out. It's just, you get that exemption for as long as it's your primary residence. So that's a little bit different than other versions that we've heard, where you would get the entire, whatever your subsidy was for the home purchase, that whole delta would be exempted. So this reduces that quite a bit. This is some legal stuff supporting families over investors. I think I touched on that briefly in January. That was that number that I mentioned of the single family home rentals were projected to be, I think 500,000 would be owned by private equity within the next 16 years. So that's one fight against that. Protecting housing affordability is another one. So there's appraisal discrimination is in here. Banning the collusion through the use of rent price fixing software, much larger problem in bigger metropolitan areas. But basically it would in real time allow landlords to kind of bid up against one another, and that really escalated rental prices in major metropolitan areas. This one is very interesting to me because I've been pushing for municipalities to use this particular provision of the real property and proceedings law for like a decade now. This bit of equipping communities to reclaim vacant properties for housing. So I've mentioned this before, but as a refresher, there are two methods. So there are two chapters of real property law, 19A and 19B. They both basically say the same thing. 19A applies to residential properties, 19B applies to commercial. If there's a property that is abandoned, and abandonment is defined by locality, not the state. If a property is abandoned and is behind 1 year in taxes, it can be foreclosed on. You don't have to wait the full 3 years. So I believe that they have beefed up 19A and 19B, but I need an attorney to take a look at this with me, which is happening tomorrow. An additional $25 million for homeless housing and assistance program. So hopefully that is great news and great timing with the wellness hub coming online. I know that Commissioner Gibson and I have talked quite a bit about, and really all of us have talked quite a bit about the need out there for supportive housing, transitional housing. We've got very few units set aside for that throughout the county. And then we've got some storm resiliency, which ties into the climate smart communities. Yeah, so I think that's the end of that. And then the first page is all land bank information. So if anyone, I'm going to put this in the chat if I can. If anyone has any questions about a specific program, you can shoot me an email because I haven't really dived into all of these quite yet. So if you got a question about a specific program or a specific facet of this, I'll prioritize that and then just shoot you back an answer. Oh, I see there's something in the chat. Okay, that's not. All right, hard pivot to something that the outreach committee talked about at our last meeting and we talked about at the last housing task force meeting. We were calling it the employee survey. I think I'm now going to refer to it as the workforce survey, workforce housing survey. I just like the name of that better. If you call it the county employee survey, it sounds like you're only surveying county employees. So workforce housing survey, I think has a much nicer ring to it. There aren't a lot of these out there in the world, but I did find a good example of one from a rural county in California. I think you should be able to see that right now. I will make it bigger. I won't go through this whole thing, it's pretty long. But I wanted to pull out some of the takeaways from it. So this is the county called Tuolumne. I believe it's very rural. It's in kind of central California. It seemed like a lot of the land there was tribal land, but there is one city within it. So there are some similarities between Columbia County and this piece of California. They've got about 18,000 workers, which is about 1,500 or so fewer than we've got here in the county. The way they went about this was, there are some questions here that hadn't occurred to me to include in a workforce survey. So I've taken those, added them to the general concepts we were thinking of. But they've got, the way that they set this up, you got homeowner questions. If you plan to buy a home or rent, depending on your answer to that, it would put you into a different track. So then the questions that you were answering were specific to your situation. So you weren't answering homeownership questions if you were a renter and didn't expect to be owning a home very soon. There were some things in here that, when we reviewed this as in the outreach committee meeting, there are a lot of preference questions. So here's a good example. What size home do you prefer? So very few people wanted, well, not quite a minority, but one of the smallest cohorts here was less than 1,500 square feet. Most people wanted the moderate size, which is 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. And then again, it's all preference based, right? So 1 or 2 story home. What size lot would you want? Everybody wanted the biggest lot available. So a lot of questions of that type. We decided in the outreach committee that it would make more sense to ask people questions about what you can reasonably include in your life, given your budget, rather than what you prefer. It just seems to skew the data if you're asking people what they would like versus what they can accommodate. The really interesting part about this survey is everyone wanted the biggest home they could get on the most land and the most amenities. Then the very last question is about their household income. And most of the respondents were in the highest quintile of the income brackets. So they were making a decent amount of money in their county, but they didn't want to pay a lot for anything. But some of the things that we hadn't considered were, it was shocking to us, I think, that we hadn't considered adding this question. Of everywhere in the county, what are the 5 places you want to live? Rank them in order, right? So just because you live in, the town of Chatham and just because you work in the town of Chatham and live in Albany doesn't necessarily mean that you want to live in Chatham. You just might want to live a little bit closer to work, but have other towns or villages that you prefer. And then you've got amenities for the communities, which we're going to incorporate as well. So I won't go through this whole thing, but what I will pull out, this is going to be a real work group session. I've got a Word doc that I can edit as we go with a bit of an overview of what this might look like and some of the more generalized questions that we had. Oh no, I'm not sure if I can make this one bigger. Is the size okay for everybody? I can make the font larger. Okay.
I can see.
Okay. The first question is, do we want to just have this be online, or do you want there to be hard copies? Because there might be some cases where the survey is being distributed in person at an employee event at a larger employer. The other option for this is to have one of those QR codes and just post it in an employee break room, but certainly make the employees and the employer aware of its existence, so it's not just something that's on the wall that they may or may not see. So that was question 1. Question 2, participation incentive. There was some question about, do we want to offer a gift card sort of lottery or raffle style? So you've got maybe a few different levels of gift cards. So you've got 1, 2, and 3. And then just someone is randomly selected. One of the respondents is selected to receive whatever those gift cards may be. And then the third one I liked a lot. That actually, we stole that we adapted this from Kent, Connecticut. So not too far away from here. They also are in the middle of, I believe, synthesizing all the results that they got from their workforce housing survey, which they just did last summer. They sent a letter to the employers before they distributed the survey, but it did have the QR code. So they did both at the same time. They surveyed the employers and then they surveyed their workforce, much like California's survey, where if you were a homeowner or a renter or were anticipating being either, it puts you into these 2 different silos of the survey. This does the same thing. So they sent a letter to the employer. They said, here's a QR code you can post in your break room. Also, here's a link for you as the employer to take this survey. Now, we did do an employer survey in the 3rd quarter of 2023. I wouldn't mind kind of doing another round as we send this out to far more employers than we sent the first one out to. So those are the 3 general questions. I'll stop there for feedback before we get into the more specific ones. I know the first question is going to be who's paying for those gift cards. Open question.
Chris, when you're saying a participation incentive, would this be for everybody or like a raffle?
I think a raffle, yeah. So say you've got, just to throw a number out there, say you've got $1,000 to spend on gift cards, 500, 300, 200, first, second, third place prize. And then you just do a completely random drawing.
So what if we did something a little more interesting, where we said if we had $1,000, we go to our local folks, like Harrington's and Williams, and we buy starter kit toolkits, like what you would need if you're going to be a homeowner, and that's what you could get, because then it's like kind of cool and it's relatable, or if you're going to be a renter even, so you're going to have a hammer and a level, different things like that, just to make it, because I think it would make it kind of more fun. Just an idea.
Put that in the little idea tab here.
And then we're supporting our local businesses who hopefully they will go to purchase their materials.
Well, whatever you decide, Chris, we have $1,500 in the budget for you for this.
Ooh.
So just to react to that, I think rather than having something specific, because it's hard to know what people already have, maybe if we chose to go to those vendors and have a gift card that could be expended at that location as opposed to a specific kind of thing.
Better idea. Yes, Supervisor, I agree.
Could you say that again, Supervisor? I'm sorry.
Well, so if we pick 3 vendors, we could have a gift card at that location. So the shopper or the winner of the gift card could go in and pick what they needed as opposed to a standard toolkit. Or a starter toolkit. They may already have a starter, but they need a Sawzall or who knows what they need.
And we might ask them to match the 1,500 so it goes further if they're getting advertising from it.
Right.
That's
You know, if
great.
you send it to Mario's, Harrington's, and some things like that that are local, you may get some participation from them, like says.
You asked for response on the first 3 questions. I think online and hard copy is probably best. When we did the town survey recently, we did both. And we got a lot more hard copy than I anticipated we would. We're an aging community, so I think there are folks who interface with pen and paper better. I'm not a big fan of participation incentives. I think that you incent the people who are least likely to avail themselves of the services that we're trying to provide, because the services are going to be connected with kind of an awful lot of paperwork and red tape. I don't think you want the people who are going to be driven by incentive, but that is an experience that I had when doing marketing in corporate life. I found that when you did things like coupons, you got coupon shoppers as customers, which makes a lot of sense. And I'm not sure that people incented by gift cards are necessarily the people who are going to fill out an application that's 14 pages for an ADU grant application. Just a thought.
Got it.
And I agree that the pre-survey letter to employers would probably help. If it were mine to spend exclusively, I would take the $1,500 to $3,000 on the incentive, and I would do more work kind of popularizing or marketing the survey itself and the benefits to the community of filling one out.
I think it might be hard to do hard copies given where you're going to go with these surveys. You're gonna get into a situation where do you want the employer to supply the hard copy? I mean, or is he going to call you up and you're going to run out there with to say Walmart? You're going to run out there with 10 copies to leave in the lunchroom every day or something like that. Whereas, I think from a practical standpoint, it's just online. I think you have to stay with online.
So to follow up on that, Tim and others, and I'm not sure what the thoughts are, I agree, you know, with Dan that there's people that want to fill it out in paper, but I'm not sure how we're compiling the information. And when you do these online, sometimes you end up with a service that you can actually compile the information very easy. When you get them on paper, then somebody's got to manually enter all that data. And don't know the process for that, though, who we're working with on that.
I mean, usually, you know, like we do comprehensive plans, we do a survey all the time, and usually, you know, you offer them from the town hall or something like that, where you can just keep running off a few. Now you're talking about how many places, Chris, do you anticipate sending this out to? 50, 100?
More, yeah, more
Oh
than
boy,
100.
yeah.
Yes,
You could be doing a tour of the county every Friday. You and Mike. Mike's going to volunteer his time to go do that.
Yeah, the last time I went, when I first took this job, you've all heard this story. I went to the 18 town halls. It took 7 hours and was 240 miles. But
well, see, you can do it quicker now. You know your way around.
I have GPS now.
But I think the other thing might be is that we could send a digital copy to the HR person and ask that he or she be responsible for, you know, a stack of hard copies. I do think that we'll lose people that don't have access to computers or internet if we don't do a hard copy. I hadn't thought about the data entry issue associated with how to get that data, you know, in the survey file. I agree that's a reasonable question, but
I like the idea that we need to try to target people that are actually looking to rent and or looking to buy. And I'm wondering if we could tap into the real estate industry into this outreach, because why get responses from people that are not really looking or don't see themselves looking?
But then again, everybody needs a house, so we do want to know how many people, it's interesting to know how many people want to buy or continuing to rent where they are. You know, that's part of the data collection, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that there multiple developers have asked, because of my role, multiple developers have basically asked me just, what is your market data? You know, who's looking for apartments? What size do they need? How many bedrooms do they need? We don't have that.
Right.
So hopefully this will help get at that.
I also think it's possible, to Dennis's point, that people have given up looking. But because of the hot market in the last 2 to 3 years, they're just, they don't feel there's anything out there to look for.
We want to know what people would like to have so that we encourage builders to build what people are looking for, but we don't always know that.
Yeah, I agree. I guess it does strike me that you don't want answers that are not really actionable. You know, you don't want just aspirational answers that, like the other survey had somebody say what their dream house is and what large, they want a big house, they want a big property, but they really can't afford that anyway. So I was trying to figure out somehow to tie in those different thoughts that I think are really valid. We want quality responses. If a developer wants quality responses, they don't want just it all ties together with the idea of incentive. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but these are all thoughts that seem to make sense to me.
I don't think there was much more feedback on the pre-survey letter to the employers other than, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yep.
I think you need to do a press release at some point.
Yeah, this will be much louder than the first one.
Just as a data point of hard versus online copy, I think we saw 540-ish total responses, and I think there was probably about 75 to 90 were hard copy. So call it 15%.
Okay, that's good to know. What was that survey for, Dan?
That was the town survey on the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
Ours was probably a little bit below that, like 10%. But back when we had a good controversy in town, we had 75% respondents.
We can manufacture.
That's what we need. Not a gift card. We need a controversy. That's what we need.
A dollar store in every town.
Yep, threaten solar panels or something, and it'll do it.
That'll get them out there.
Yeah, a negative incentive or an inverse incentive. All right. I'll go down to the specific survey question areas. So I didn't scroll all the way down to it, but we talked about the 2 tracks that the survey takes: homeownership versus rental. One of the questions that they asked was, what is your current household size? And then they didn't ask, what would your household size be if you moved, right? I think a lot of people that would be looking for an apartment might be living with their parents currently, or whatever their living situation is. Your household size doesn't always transfer from location to location. So that was one question that we wanted to add. What would be your household size should you find an apartment or buy a home? Preferences versus capacity was one of the ones that we talked about, asking what can you reasonably, this is a little bit crasser than I think we would want the language, but it's basically what you're asking. What can you reasonably afford instead of what would you like? Location goes back to that bit about incorporating where in the county you would like to live as ranked choice voting for the towns, villages, and the city, just so we can kind of know.
Chris?
Yeah, or I guess
Does
the
it-
distribution of home seekers. Go ahead.
I don't know if this is just throwing it out there. Should there be an option of a range of what your current household income is so that a person is providing that you know, because I might say I want a 5-bedroom house, but I might make $40,000. Like, what is your current household income might help. I don't know. Seems to
Oh,
me.
yeah. Yeah, that's in there.
Hey, Chris, would it be possible to say what is your maximum budget instead of what you can afford?
Yeah, and there's a question there. Do you want to start introducing concepts like housing cost burden to people taking a survey? Probably not. So I don't want to have to make people do math to figure out what they can afford to not be this thing they never heard of until they read the survey. So I think you kind of have to meet them halfway, do a little bit of that work going into the survey. So if you are at this income band, can you afford X rent? Because you don't always know what other expenses people have. Individuals have very different budgets. So for some folks, spending 30% of their gross income on housing isn't a big deal because they don't have a lot of other expenses. For other folks, it's a huge deal because they've got so many other expenses, especially things like childcare and insurance.
That's
Yeah,
that's a good point, Chris, because I mean, I had a conversation with another contractor on a job site about a year or so ago. And I came from one of our meetings and we were talking about the whole 30% and this, that, and the other thing. And we, got into his salary a little bit. But he said, I just don't have the bare essentials of a house, but I'd love to have a good pickup truck because I love going up the Adirondacks or somewhere. So everybody's got their own priorities. Even though we deal with this 30% thing, I mean, not everybody's the 30%er.
right.
Also, does it matter if you're a double or single income household? Because that tends to affect what your budget is also.
Yeah, and it affects the programs that you can access too, because
Yeah.
whether the number of people in your household affects the AMI chart, which affects the grant programs you can access, yada, yada.
So, Chris, when you say preferences versus a capacity, is this a section that you're going to build out a series of questions around?
Yeah, well, so I'm just trying to get general concepts, right? So this one I pulled out because it differed from that survey. So that
Okay, so preferences would be kind of what kind of housing are you looking for?
Yeah, and also, which of the towns or villages would you like to live in? What amenities are important to you? And that's another note on here, whether they're community amenities like parks or housing amenities like in-unit laundry. So those things are preferences. And I think that can help.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, you also said that you're going to kind of poll them somewhat about how many people in the household existing and potential and all that. And so that's going to be another section under this, I assume?
Yeah, it'll just be one of the questions. And I'm actually, as I hear you say it, I'm not even sure that existing household size is a relevant question. Unless you're transferring, I think that because you get at the same information by just asking one question, what would be your household size should you find housing in Columbia County? That's the same thing.
It's a way to tie those. I'm sorry, Dan, Chris, just to answer that, it's a way to tie those questions. If you ask the same question a different way, you'll find out if you're getting a similar answer or a very different answer.
That's true.
Yeah,
just
and I would
how many
say that
people are in the household. We do
right.
That,
I think it also helps you understand a little bit about how people, to what extent are people changing their lives in order to go live on their own or live in a different situation than they're in now. So are they talking about going from a household of 6 to 2 or 3 to 7, or what is the transition going to look like? But I think the size of the household is really, really important if we're going to ask them how they prefer to live. Because if you look back at the document you had before, where you kind of graphed out, who wants to live in a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, all that. My guess is that's going to be very closely related either to the exact amount of budget that they think they have and what that buys, or it's going to be tied to the household size. And I think we're going to want to have that ratio in our pocket because we're not going to get that big a response in terms of the total population. So it would be very helpful to understand if 80% of the respondents want 1 bedroom for every 2 people in their household or something along those lines, and apply that to the rest of the population.
It's the specific number I want to get at because you you typically see far fewer of these than you typically see far fewer 3-bedroom units than 1 or 2-bedroom units going online, whether it's home ownership or rental. And I think there's probably going to be a sizable proportion of single income folks that would like 3 bedrooms because, you know, they're the one parent and then there are 2 kids that would each like their own bedroom. And I don't believe that a lot of those units are currently being built.
But I also think, Chris, one of the problems, housing issues we're all trying to deal with is generational housing. And I know Dennis and I worked on a few projects a number of years ago in which the house had 3 bedrooms, but then we also had something called a flex space on the first floor, which could be either a home office or an extra bedroom. And then we built the septic for the extra in the event that the room became an extra bedroom. So I think to allow people to think more holistically about not only what their plans are today, but what they might need in 2 to 5 years, particularly with our aging population in Columbia County, is not a bad idea.
Well, you know, that's a good question. How long would you like to live in your next home, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the rest of your life or just X amount of time.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah.
Time in the eternity.
We'll call
Wise
that.
guy.
I wish there's some way to capture those people that are looking at the available apartments for rent and that are looking at the available homes for sale. I mean, I wish there was some way that, you know, you go through our website and you get to those websites, but in the meantime, can you take this survey?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Before you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think I hit on most of the rest of these. I really like the ranked choice. You know, in some cases, the preferences do make sense, I think, right? So for amenities, developers always want to know about that. Where in the county would you like to live? I think it's really important. They asked a question that, this was my favorite question that they asked. They asked if the respondents were aware of housing assistance programs, whether they wanted to rent or own. I think this is largely probably going to be a no. And then in their survey, if they included a link to these programs. So whether it was, you know, so obviously it's not for developers, right? So they're not going to ask you if you know about LIHTC, but they might ask you if you know about home buyer development assistance. They might ask you if you know about down payment match savings accounts. So I think I call it a can opener because I think what that can help do is demonstrate the need when our nonprofits are applying for grants to the state. We'll be able to say, hey, we put out this survey to our workforce. 60% of the respondents said they didn't know anything about this program, but were interested in.
I would move that right up to the top. To me, that's the most important question, and I would just keep it as simple as possible. And if you put that right near the front, that gets people's attention. It's not just another feel-good type survey that, you know, I'm, you know, hoping for this, that, and the other thing. You're actually talking about there may be a way that I can actually maybe afford something.
So kind of use it as almost its own marketing tool.
Oh, absolutely. I think that I just
Call it an inducement, not an incentive.
Yeah, and similarly, if you could ask the question, you know, have you had trouble finding a home, you know, so you can empathize with them right up front, you know?
Yeah, maybe ask some of these folks, you know, have you been looking for housing in Columbia County for how long? You know, questions like that.
Well, speaking of, would it be off the wall to see if we could get this distributed to the Section 8 list, which I understand has grown again. But those, to Dennis's point, are people who are definitely looking.
I don't think it would be an issue.
Is it?
You mean
I mean,
the
it's
waiting
possible
list?
I'm sorry.
Did you ask a question, Dan?
I did. I wondered if Brenda meant the waiting list for Section 8 or
Yes.
yeah.
Is it too pie in the sky to think we could create an app?
Yes.
Really? I mean, if you could, like, you know, if you could have this survey lead people to things that would help them, that's the incentive, right? I mean,
Yeah, that makes me wonder if I wonder if there is an app out there for whether you're seeking tenancy or homeownership that I know the state probably doesn't have one, but there might be some enterprising nonprofit or association that put one together. Even if it's bare bones, it's still, anything that's an index for people to use would be great.
Well, maybe
And
we
that
can
app is-
partner with
what
somebody
is-
who's,
Why don't
who
you ask
has that.
Patterns for Progress? Do they maybe know?
I will ask them, and then I think
Maybe
maybe
Rutherford?
Albany Can Code could help with that. We're all capital region sometimes.
And help me understand, the app does what besides help them take the survey?
No. The point was if there were some way to capture those people that are looking or have been looking for an affordable place to live. And if the app, has the survey in it, but the app could also help them, in some way immediately, like, help them find, programs that are out there. It's just somehow that the app is tied. The app would somehow capture the very people you were talking about. Actually trying to capture the people that are seriously having trouble finding homes or seriously aspiring to find a home. Like your point with the ADU program, it's like those are the people we want, right? So if we could create the survey as a gateway to the ADU program, that's one way of being sure we're getting the people that are actionable home buyers or actionable home renters. Just somehow to do what you were trying to do.
Yeah, I like that. I'll talk to Pattern about that tomorrow, actually. Okay. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think should be included?
Basic demographics?
Not just of the household, but of the respondent themselves. What's your age, all that, education level, things like that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure how valuable education level is. But certainly, age, I think we want to maybe do a little bit about income levels. You got that in somewhere, I think.
Yeah, but it's okay to say more than once. That's okay.
You could even fold in how long you planning to live in your next home kind of question. You could ask marital status or partnership status. You could ask whether they are a single or dual income household or multiple income household. You could ask how many jobs they have.
Oh, that's a good distinction because those are very different things.
Yep.
I think you could include partner on there too, single, married, if you have a domestic partner, because that's recognized.
Agreed.
I'm also wondering if we could add some questions that would give us a heads up of who's going to leave if any of the prices go up.
Yeah. I don't know how do you ask that, right? So what's your sensitivity to the housing market volatility? There's got to be a way to get there.
Yeah, like when are you going to move to North Carolina? In 3 years or?
I think Rupco already gave us that answer with that data set they showed us. I wonder, is there any of the data that is going to help us with grant applications in the future, such as, would it be helpful to know that, of the 100% pool of people looking for housing right now, 87% have school-age children, or 27% have retirees, or something like that. So would it help us to know the makeup of the household for the purposes of writing future or having data to write future grants?
Well, it definitely helps to have measurable results so that if you can create your survey in a way that you could retake the survey and show measurable results. And that way you can attach the survey to the grant application. So if you were working with a foundation, they're going to want to know, how are you going to know if you're succeeding? And then, so for example, if you had a survey that's, you know, you put out there like we did recently for composting. And then you say you could send the survey out again and determine how many more people are now composting. So measurable results are really important for grant applications.
Okay.
I mean, we could just circulate the survey annually. That sort of gets you to the same thing, right? You can see the change in the trend line and some of the answers.
I actually think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, and if you can put the like a star on the ones that you're really watching out for, you know.
What's the cost of performing the survey?
Depends on who you ask to do it. So that's something that I've got a couple of feelers out there. You know, the last time we got a really good deal from Berkshire Taconic because they happen to have someone who had basically a PhD in survey collection on staff. I don't think we've got that same resource this time around.
I think you have to keep it from getting to be too long too.
There's that, right? So I think anything longer than 2 pages, people, you know, front and the back, people will start to lose some sort of interest. That's for hard copies. But, you know, there are a lot of questions in here that we would like answers to. So there's a sweet spot somewhere in between brevity and, I guess, inclusivity.
And if you do it online, the thing I like is when I do a survey, which is very rare, I hate these things, is the thermometer that moves along and tells you how much longer it is. Because I've shut off so many 3/4 of the way through because you start these things with the best intentions and half hour later you're still answering questions.
Yeah. Have you ever taken the one where after a certain amount of questions, it tells you you're doing great? And
Yeah.
It's like I get where they're coming
city
from.
slickers, you know, you're making good time, but we don't know where we're going.
Would anybody like to co-invest in this for the data? I mean, would like a bank want to co-invest in this so they get the data?
Is Mike still on the call?
You have to be a little careful of that at CEDC because we try to be ecumenical with all these banks, and if we start showing, you know, we'd have to figure out how they'd have to pay for it, so we could differentiate it with other members as to why they got the marketing value of it. But we can look into that.
You know, or a coalition.
Yeah. We could get them all to sign up based on they're all going to get CYR credit, you know, for CRA credit for helping to address housing issues or something. But yeah, we can. And Berkshire Taconic often has some funding through some of their buckets that, but certainly, as I sit here and listen to enhance all these enhancements are going to be more than we have budgeted for this type of thing. So, you know, Chris and I can talk about how we can find a way to get
and they might be
others involved.
They may be able to add human resources to it also, you know.
Yeah.
Put their communication department in.
We'll look into those things.
Speaking of, I wrote Dyson Foundation on here. I was unaware of the Dyson Foundation, but became very aware of them today or yesterday. They gave $500,000 each to Rupco and Hudson River Housing for a brand new program for each of them, a revolving loan fund for affordable housing pre-development. Very cool announcement. And the Dyson Foundation does include Columbia County as part of their service area.
Chris, I've been receiving funds from them for 20 years in my last 3
I saw
jobs.
on there.
And so I was going to say that when you saw it, I'm like, yeah, so we're in one of their 6 core areas after the crash in 2008. They've never expanded their core areas, but this is one of them. And we do the parenting and our anger management program in Columbia County with their funds. So we're already connected with them. So if we could be of help, let me know.
Yeah, that would be huge. Thank you. Okay. We don't have to get all the feedback tonight. I think we've got some really good stuff here. And I can start building out kind of like a draft of this. And really try to keep it below. I think 4 pages is the most you want to do.
And Chris, there are a couple of things in the chat about links or apps.
Hang on, I haven't been able to see the chat for a while. Oh, great. Yeah, some of this, so this goes back to, we had an event at the, well, we didn't have an event, but the Rojan Housing Task Force, Housing Committee, had an event at the Hillsdale Library, and Spark of Hudson has invited me to an event here in the city in a couple of weeks. They're both sort of kind of marketed as, are you interested in affordable housing? Attend this event, which sounds like if people show up, you're going to be able to direct them towards resources that they need right then and there. And that's not really what this is. But I still think just letting people or giving people some sort of awareness of the programs that are out there, I think can't be a bad thing. But you also want to manage people's expectations with stuff like this. You don't want people to show up, you know, saying, yeah, I do need an affordable rental. And you're like, great, let me tell you about this land bank idea. Like those, you know, you really need to manage the expectations for any kind of outreach. All right, the last button I want to put on this is just a piece of public information. It's already out there, but I want to highlight it and, you know, want to distribute it to your networks. Any folks you know who might be interested. It seems that Phil Geller is divesting himself of most, if not all, of his rental portfolio in the village of Philmont. So there's currently, it's 9 buildings and 36 units up for sale for a little under $5 million. Which works out to $138,000 per unit. Stop, Rob. It works out to about $138,000 per unit. I've sent it around to kind of the usual suspects of nonprofit developers. So, you know, the idea there would be if people are in these units, retain them if you can. But at the end of the day, try to keep them from going market or above market if they aren't already.
Yeah,
I grew up in Philmont, by the way, so I could snicker. Born and bred. I grew up in the gut, which is on West Street, and you know, yeah, we had Hank Casavan for all those years, and then he left, and Phil Geller. I guess these guys sell houses once every 100 years, whether they need it or not.
They're all within about 1/8 of a mile of each other. It's pretty packed in.
That's Factory Hill for you, man.
All right. Does anyone else have anything they want to get off their chest before we go?
Do you have any nonprofit developers who have expressed any interest in those properties or not yet?
Not quite yet. I got to be honest, there's a lot of, I don't want to get into national politics, but there's a lot of sort of wait and see right now. Folks aren't really sure what their funding sources and streams are going to look like for the next X amount of time. So right now, I think there's a little bit of reticence for taking on something that large. Supervisor Collins.
Hey, Chris. I'm just asking because I had a couple people ask me about an application that came in front of was it the Greenport or the Hudson Planning Board about Healy Boulevard and some affordable housing units down there or transitional housing. Do you have any information on that?
There's several projects. Go ahead with, you've got the hub, of course.
Yeah, Healy is Piero, right? Is that Joseph Piero?
No, that's in Hudson on the boulevard.
On Fairview
Supervisor,
Fairview.
there is a developer who is looking to revive the Redburn project behind the Napa Auto Supply. We think it would be 2 75-unit buildings that would be built in phases to ensure proper absorption. But as far as I know, as of Monday, they were getting close to signing the contract, which give them 6 months to study it. But and then Chris, was there some other not-for-profit project that you had? I have some recollection of, but I don't remember the details.
No, I mean, so it had not in Greenport.
Wasn't it the one where they were? We talked about it, and it was not the Greenberger County project, but there was some other group that was looking for some kind of supportive housing. but we'll look into it, Supervisor, and get back
Circle
to
back.
you.
The other thing, Denal, over by us, Camp Hill Village, we saw at the county planning board last month. They're looking to put another building up of 12 units in it.
Yeah, someone just had specifically mentioned Healy Boulevard, and I thought they said 35 units, but it didn't sound like they knew anything. And
Yeah.
I couldn't respond.
I will find it because I have a recollection of it. I just can't. And I'm going to meet with Ed Steffler on Monday. So if I don't find it before then, I'll let you know then.
I think Ed mentioned something about a group that was going to do some transitional housing.
Yeah.
Healy Boulevard, like across from ShopRite in that area.
Yeah, I'm looking on the planning board agenda.
Actually, I can help out with that. I think that's in the early stages.
Yeah.
They've reached out to me to see what our need is for emergency housing. But I don't know how far along that's going to get, and that's not going to be permanent, or at least that's not the thought at this point.
Yeah, this thing I'm seeing here is called Healy Homes. Presented a project overview. It's been downsized to 25 dwelling units with support spaces. He's been in contact with the water department. Ray Drukowski mentioned an extension of the sewer line would be needed, potentially a holding tank. Paul McCreary seems to be the developer. He recounted his meeting with the highway department. And I guess you were there, Bob.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. So it looks like it's in the early stages, and in a town with no zoning, you don't know what the planning board's going to do.
All right, thank you.
So I'm glad my recollection wasn't as vague as I knew it was there. I just couldn't think of it.
Can I share a non-housing but nonprofit related item?
Of course.
So we have well, back in the day, Cornell used to house people on their properties, but because people abused it and didn't take, like if let's say you were terminated, you wouldn't leave and you would stay on living there but weren't working. So I have this cottage that has been renovated. I cannot rent it out for residential, but if any of you know of a good nonprofit that would be in alignment with our mission, it has one large room with a fireplace that they can't use, a private office, a very nice bathroom. We have ample parking and it's right there on our campus, but it would be a nonprofit who's doing any sort of work in education, human services. And it's a very nice space that we renovated. It has a new septic because it used to just have an old car body, I think, as a septic 2 years ago. So we put a lot of money into it. And I just wanted to share that with you all if you know anybody that might be looking.
Lisa, how do we get a hold of you?
Aha. My number in the chat. And you get to come see wonderful people.
All right. Mike and I have a conversation with Homes and Community Renewal tomorrow about some of the new programs. So we'll have even more light shed on some of the things that we saw in the executive budget. And then I would say be on the lookout. I think the recurring meeting invites for some of the committees may not have been distributed yet. And I didn't have this meeting on my calendar. So let me go through my Zoom invites and make sure that everyone has everything that they should have.
Thank you for that.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
thanks. That works out well.
All right.
The governor did announce today in Albany that the capital region is going to be one of several across the state on-ramped centers. And it's a grant was for $300,000 in planning grants to develop a detailed roadmap to develop a business plan. And then if it's accepted, each center will receive $40 million to implement the funding. And the goal is to use it to address education, transportation, childcare, academic readiness, and affordability. It's very vague, obviously, if you're going to spend $300,000 to figure out what your plan is. But you know, we're one of the 8 counties in the footprint, and we've been involved we participated in the application that was submitted in October. But they're looking to physically locate the hub of the center that will serve all 8 counties at the College of St. Rose, which, as you know, was closed recently. And I also saw that Albany County is looking at perhaps moving their office building there.
And this is going to go through CEG for our region?
Yes, and
Okay.
I have some knowledge of CEG, having run it for 8 years, but
Yeah.
anyway. So we'll figure out how to get a share of the money.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I'll see supervisors next week at the county board. Other than that, I will see you at the next committee meetings.
Thank you all.
Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Drive
Good
safely
night,
wherever you are.
thank you.
Everybody.